Well, hello again, everybody. As we begin to look at our next romantic author, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, let's take just a few moments to remember that Samuel Taylor Coleridge was friends with William Wordsworth, and they collaborated on lyrical ballads, which you'll remember was a really big deal. It was, a watershed moment for writing, started Romanticism in England. Many people look at the publication of lyrical ballads in what year? 1798 as the start of Romanticism. And Wordsworth and Coleridge not only collaborated together, they were good friends for a long time. And do you remember when we looked at Tintern Abbey, we talked about the sublime? Yeah, good. And how for the transcendentalists, how did they experience the sublime? What did they seek? What was their catalyst? Nature, exactly. Very good. Now, there's other ways to experience the sublime. Some people experience the sublime through prayer and meditation. You can do it through music. And kind of a little sad note, for a lot of people, they experience the sublime through drug use. And this was the case with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coleridge became addicted to laudanum, and laudanum is opium that's dissolved in alcohol, such as brandy or wine. And then what would happen is you would take, your beverage, and you would put drops, you would count out the number of drops of laudanum that you were putting into your beverage, and then you would drink it. And laudanum, opium, is an opiate. And then you would, as with other opiates, you'd become very drowsy and you would often fall asleep. And after taking a dose of laudanum, a lot of users would experience incredibly vivid dreams. But because of the effect of the drug, they would be unable to wake up from the dream. And these dreams oftentimes were really good or really bad. And opium use, laudanum use, became kind of a problem in 19th century, not just in England, but through other places as well. And a lot of people today look back at the time and go, geez, that's really weird, that's kind of crazy. But we have to remember, in America, we have the opioid epidemic going on, very similar. Drug addiction is drug addiction. Also have to remember, in the 19th century, you would just go down to the apothecary, which is equivalent of the drugstore, and you'd talk to, the druggist about what was wrong with you, and then he would give you drugs, such as, laudanum or, some cocaine. Yeah, sure. And then you would very easily become addicted. And if you're kind of, a little side note, then we'll get back. If you're kind of curious about this happened to, not just Samuel Taylor Coleridge, but other writers as well. Thomas de Quincey, he wrote a book about his experiences that's called Confessions of an English Opium Eater. And his name again is Thomas de Quincey. There's been lots of writing throughout the ages about, people becoming addicted to opium. So for Samuel Taylor Coleridge, this is how he sought the sublime, right? So he became addicted to laudanum, and as we move into Rime of the Ancient Mariner, this poem is supernatural. And a lot of students, once they realize this about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, they get kind of disgruntled. They're like, oh man, he was just on drugs and he wrote this poem. Well, not throughout the whole poem. Not everything was written under the influence of laudanum, but certainly some aspects were. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge's, his addiction to laudanum, he was eventually able to break it, but it also robbed him of his poetic powers. In other words, he eventually lost the ability to write poetry. He had a falling out with William Wordsworth, and then they became reconciled later. And then he turned to writing criticism, such as we have selections from Biographia Literaria that we're going to look at, especially what he terms the secondary imagination and how it's different from the primary imagination. So I'm not going to have any spoilers here about Rime of the Ancient Mariner, so we'll just dive into that and get to experience this masterpiece of English literature on its own.